At the inception of the Ninth Assembly, the Senate and House of Representatives promised to amend the country's electoral laws. There was a previous attempt by the Eighth Assembly to amend the Electoral Act before the 2019 general elections. However, President Buhari refused to sign the bill into law on the premise that it was close to the 2019 general elections. Many Nigerians have yearned for the passage of this critical bill, hoping that it can sanitize the country's electoral system persistently plagued by violence, ballot box snatching, underage voting and cash for votes. The Senate and House committees on INEC began working on the legislation, requesting input from organizations and individuals on the bill. Public hearings were held and views collated. On July 15, 2021, the National Assembly passed the Electoral Act Amendment Bill on the final day of plenary before it proceeded on its annual recess. Days before the passage, reports swept the country of plans to expunge a clause from the bill which guaranteed electronic transmission of results, a critical aspect of elections. The Senate amended Clause 52, which gives INEC the discretion to introduce electronic voting as may be practicable.
The Commission may consider electronic transmission of results provided the national coverage is adjudged to be adequate and secure by the National Communication Commission (NCC) and approved by the National Assembly.
Clause 52(3) as amended by Senator Basi Akpan. Say aye. Those against say nay. The nays have it.
This amendment sharply split lawmakers, and the minority leader called for a division, the first in the Ninth Assembly.
Mr. President, I still insist. We want Nigerians to know who has voted or not.
28.
The votes were cast and counted, and the majority voted to amend Clause 52 by empowering the NCC to determine the use of electronic means to transmit election results.
I vote no, just to allow INEC to do the best job for Nigeria. Thank you.
Mr. President, I stand on the side of the people, of Nigerians. I vote yes.
I categorically vote no against the amendment by distinguished Senator Albert.
Yes to electronic transmission of results, because that is what Nigerians want.
28 voted yes, those that supported the amendment. 52 senators voted no, they don't want the amendment. 28 of our colleagues, senators, are absent in different parts of the country doing some jobs for the Senate and the National Assembly. Nobody abstained. Total 108.
Today in Nigeria, I don't know the coverage.
In the House of Representatives, Clause 52 of the amendment bill caused a rowdy session. However, the lower chamber finally amended Clause 52, empowering INEC to decide on the best means to transmit election results. But 3 months later, on October 12, 2021, the Senate made a U-turn and gave INEC free rein to determine the procedure of transmission of results during elections.
Subordinating the authority of INEC to NCC and even to the National Assembly, to the Senate, for approval was a violation of the ground norm, and that is the Constitution.
The Senate also re-amended Clause 87, prescribing direct primaries for political parties. On November 9, 2021, the National Assembly passed the harmonized version of the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, empowering INEC to determine the procedure for voting and transmission of results during an election. It also approved direct primaries for aspirants to all elective positions. The adoption of the conference report marks the completion of the amendment of the Electoral Act Bill in the Ninth Assembly. Going forward, the bill is to be transmitted to President Buhari with the expectation that he will give his assent early enough to allow INEC and political parties prepare for the 2023 general elections.
So many battles on that bill, and it has all gone to the final front of the battle, which is the president's table. The last time, people are you know, there are those who are still wondering why the president didn't sign the bill into law as passed by the 8th Assembly. And they're wondering, is the same fate going to befall this one? Well, I guess time will tell, because now it seems there is no controversy whatsoever in the National Assembly, but outside of it, is the president or the presidency also as conflicted? I guess time will tell. But in the meantime, conversations have been going on, and everyone, there are those who are in favor of the bill being signed as is, and there are those who are saying the president should withhold his assent to the bill for one reason or another. Well, let's have a conversation around this morning. Ezenwa Nwagu joins us. He is Chairman, Partners for Electoral Reform, convener, Say No campaign, and board member, Civil Society Situation Room. He joins us virtually from Oka. Thanks for joining us this morning, Mr. Nwagu, as well as the Chairman, House Committee on Media in the House of Representatives, Honorable Benjamin Kalu. We do not have him yet, but I'm pretty sure that he will join us in the conversation. So, Mr. Nwagu, let us begin with you. Now, all of these controversies and all of these conversations going on around this, we have won several battles, it will seem, around this bill, and this is where we are now. What are your thoughts on the raging controversies, and in which way do you see the pendulum swinging?
Well, thank you for having me, and good morning. I think that the pendulum will swing on the side of the Nigerian people. The conflicting situation that you see is working in the favor of those who look to electoral integrity, who look to the expanding of the political space, who look to the strengthening of the Independent National Electoral Commission, and creating enabling environment for free, fair, and credible elections. The National Assembly has, through the legislative treadmill, provided a bill that, looking at it broadly, you will see that if that bill is passed, there are gains that already have been, that will have made, and will not be able to reverse those gains if the president assents to the bill. One of those will be, and we had made the argument before now, that one of the ways to stem and ensure that the president does not rescind assenting to the bill will have been to embed the Office of the Attorney General and the Minister of Justice in the committee processes and the public hearings, so that if there are I's that needs to be dotted, T's that needs to be crossed, that will have been done before it gets to the president, because the challenge actually has always been this advice. But you know that also that what is playing is also big, and it's time to alert Nigerians that the conflict between members of the National Assembly and the governors may be part of what we need to confront. And the reason for that is that we seem to be thinking that there's a too-gooder National Assembly that wants direct primaries, for instance. By direct primaries, we know that the space will be opened up. We know that we will take away negative godfatherism. We know that deep pockets will no longer be able to control party primaries and machinery. But the National Assembly is playing a survival game, as some of them who were governors before, who used cronyism and patronage to cause the kind of disaffection that you have Nigerians give to indirect primary, are sitting in the National Assembly and hoping that the pills that they serve people will not be served to them. The attrition rates in the National Assembly has been pretty very low because of the activities of the governors. And these governors are sitting, some of them are there sitting in the National Assembly, who made sure that people did not come back to the National Assembly by excluding them, taking away the forms, and using the delegate system to oppress them. So that fight between the governor has now taken place. I think the media, the civil society need to focus on something that we work to the expanding of the democratic space, and I think that key for that to happen. The financial independence of INEC. Before now, we have a situation in which, yes, INEC is independent, but it grows cap in hand from the National Assembly to the Ministry of Finance to get monies appropriated to it on the first night charge released, sometimes 2 months, sometimes 3 months to election time. And then the vendors who are not paid, contractors who need to do things early enough, and some other preparations for elections are, we then create an emergency. When we create that emergency, corruption becomes very close. So if this bill is passed, with the INEC fund that is contemplated, monies for election and preparation for elections will have been given to INEC 1 year before the election. And then we will not have these perennial issues of logistic challenges and punctuality, low punctuality index that we continue to have in our elections. The third one will be the enhancement of electoral and election integrity through technology. The transmission of election results will inarguably increase the trust level for our elections. When there is a balancing, cross-checking with the manual, which the beavers, which the electoral transmission of results guarantees, more confidence will be reposed in the fact, and legitimacy will increase for those who govern, because at that point in time it will be clear that they won those elections and that the will of the people actually played out. So for me, it's our responsibility to ask the president to do the needful, to play for this time, ensure that these things that Nigerian people, irrespective of politics and
well, I really hope that we'll be able to have a fun conversation given the low bandwidth from your end. But on that last issue that you raised on transmission of results, there are those who are still wondering. It seems that the whole process is still largely manual, despite the introduction of electronic transmission of the results. Some forms still need to be signed, filled manually, signed manually, and a snapshot taken and sent electronically. So in terms of how manual the process still is, do you see it as an inhibition, or you see it as something that we should just take what we have for now and over time we will evolve?
Thank you. I'm hoping that you can hear me very well. But I think that basically what needs to happen is that we can't surrender our electoral process to technology. There is nowhere that happens. We will have to have a dual situation in which both manual run side by side with technology. Why you see you are crying over increase in technology, which is the way we should go. It has more to do with trust deficiency in the whole process. The idea behind INEC continued interest in improving technology and use of technology to integrity, but it does not take away, because at the end of the day, you know the challenges of technology. You know that if you go to court at times, you still need that paper trail to be able to follow through some of these issues. If we solely depend on technology, we can have a situation in which things are wiped out. You may not be able to have a back end, all of those terminologies that are used to confuse people like us who are not very technologically savvy. The challenge, therefore, is that whether here or outside, even in the US, in Germany, there is still manual, but we need to go to technology, especially in this area now where we can cross-check. Now people in any part of the world can see the results as they are posted into the portal. And once that result comes into the portal, the paper alteration becomes very difficult. So for me, generally, there is no confusion about going to go side by side with the manual.
Okay, well, the conversation we can expand now. We have the spokesperson, chairman of House Committee on Media, Honorable Benjamin Kalu, joining us as well. Thanks for joining us this morning. So many conflicts, it would seem, going on and on about this yeoman's job that some are praising and some are faulting. How is the House taking this on board? Honorable Kalu, can you hear me? Well, I'm not very sure he can hear me. I'm pretty sure we'll get around that. So, Mr. Wagu, still on that mode of transmission of results, clause 63 on counting of votes and forms, subsection 5 says in the amended clause says, the presiding officer shall transfer the results, including total number of accredited voters and the results of the ballot, in a manner as prescribed by the Commission. If the Commission, for instance, prescribes that the forms shall be electronic forms, is it allowed in the law, or it has to be paper, as you have said?
Well, if this amendment goes through, then the electronic will be continued. But if it is not amended, as the law stands now, you cannot, it still is not admissible. So the intention of that piece of legislation is that the INEC has the responsibility to conduct elections and prescribe whatever ways it thinks should be used. And INEC, I think, understands that you cannot, like I said, you will not abandon the process completely to technology. You still have to manualize the process if that's in which. But for me, like I said, if we get to that point where we can reduce manual intervention in our electoral process, the better for us. Because what you have seen is that elections have shifted away from INEC to the polling units. And that is why we see vote for money is getting more and more traction. Because you no longer need to compromise electoral officials to like used to see in the past. Now, everything you do has to be in the polling unit. And that's why we said collation is the weakest link in the electoral process. So if we tighten up that area through a cross-checking methodology, a methodology that can help us cross-check what has come from the paper, and then there's a technological, an electronic process that helps us to confirm this and gives everybody the confidence that what happens in the polling unit is what has been taken to the collation center. Then more and more confidence will continue to, people will get inspired, and more people will trust the process, and then some of these conversations about low voter turnouts may begin to change.
Very interesting part there where you talk about the weakest link being the mode of the collation. But we'll get to that, I hope. Honorable Benjamin Kalu, I hope we have you now. He's spokesman for House of Representatives. Now, all of the conflicts and conversations going on about this bill that the National Assembly has passed, a lot of for and against. How is the National Assembly taking it?
Yeah, thank you very much for having me, and apologies for the breaking network the last time I tried to join. The National Assembly, how we are taking it is is what we expected this. We expected the kind of reactions that we are getting at the moment, where some will be for it and some will be against it, just like any other piece of legislation. But if you do your statistics well, you will find out that those who are for it are greater than those who are against it. And that is what democracy is all about. If it is for the people, then greater number of people, majority of number of people queuing behind it shows that it is a people-oriented piece of legislation. So we are not worried with what is happening. It shows that our democracy is getting healthier by the day. And we feel that consultations going on, lobbying going on at the presidency is not also out of place. But it depends on whether or not the presidency will align with the few, a handful of people, as against the majority of people who are saying we need to advance our democracy from where it is to where it ought to be, if not completely, at least closer to what it ought to be. If you recall, we had this issue when it was a PIB. There was a lot of agitation as well. So it's not only Electoral Act. A lot of people ventilated their opinion on these issues. And at the end of the day, PIB is today PIA. And I can assure you as well that Mr. President is looking at the opinion of the National Assembly because he respects the separation of powers. And the National Assembly is not wavering on our position that what is healthy for our democracy is to begin to strengthen it the way it ought to be. If there are issues, like people always say, we need to amend this and amend that. If you remember, the PIB went into the president, and after passage, few days after that, an amendment came up. We are battling with a calendar, electoral calendar that we need to meet up with. So if there are issues that people have, go ahead, note those issues, follow the legislative process, speak to your representatives, so that by the time it goes for the president to assent to it and it comes back, just like the PIB, if there's an amendment, it will be accommodated by the House. But INEC need to move on. A lot of planning is involved for the 2023 election. We're almost in 2022, and we're talking about laws that will be able to guide the planning of the coming election. Our suggestion is no law is cast on stone. If the public have the good number to amend a piece of legislation, they should do so using the right platform, and it will be tolerated. But now we need to move on. We really have to move on. I don't think the dissenting opinion with regards to Clause 52 that everybody's talking about, that you just discussed with my colleague there, and also 87. That is the major thing that people are talking about, and I think for me it's very healthy, in strengthening our democracy. So that's how we see it. We see that it's not cast on stone. We see that it's still a room for us to amend if the need arises, but we must move on. And we're encouraging Mr. President to move on. And I'm sure that Mr. President is also looking at what is before him and consulting the National Assembly, to get their opinion on that.
Well, while we wait, while we wait to see which way the president will swing with his pen, there also talk around how this is going to be implemented. And I have this question for Mr. Ezenwe Wago, who I believe is still with us. Honorable, I'll come to you shortly. And I think for a number of people, while the words of the amendment bill are, impressive and in some instances commendable, there are worries about the people who will operate the Electoral Act Amendment Bill, who will eventually operate the Electoral Act as signed. Because when you look at what transpired in Anambra, first, the major worry around Anambra was the security situation, which was totally out of the control of the Electoral Electoral Act. That's one. And then when you look at the deployment of logistics, which boil down again to people, there will be questions as to, in that sort of situation, you know, is there any provision? Because it would seem that law alone will not be able to cure all. How would you advise that we proceed when we look at some of the challenges that we have recently encountered from the elections in Anambra, especially when it comes to deploying manpower and logistics? And this is for Mr. Wago.
Well, if you can hear me, I think that I hinted around that when the conversation started. I made the point that first, this Electoral Act is the most amended piece of legislation since our return to democracy. And sometimes I make a joke that we need to have an audit to see how much it has cost us to always amend this piece of legislation. Having said that, there's a lot of work beyond the law. The first is the issue around internal party democracy. We talk about primaries and all the benefits that comes from it. But the parties will still screen the candidates. If they screen the candidates, if they don't present you to contest in the direct primaries, you are not going to contest. So the folks who do the screening and those who control them will still be, you know, we're not. The law is not dealing with that. So there needs to be a conversation around party administration, party organization, and administration. That's a conversation that needs to take place differently away from the one that we're having now. Because the process that takes you to be an aspirant or a candidate of a political party can still be made in the confusion and crisis that we want to run away from. That's for the political parties.
Well, let's quickly pause there, because it would seem that you've also separated the two issues. I mean, you've separated the conduct of elections from the internal workings of political parties. We'll take a bit more on both the elections and the internal workings of political parties when we come back from this break. Please stay with us. Well, we're still talking about the Electoral Act Amendment Bill as it awaits the President's assent. Yes, it's been sent to the President, and we understand he has about 27 days or so to decide whether or not he will pen his signature to it. And there's been lobbying from both members of the National Assembly and governors as well. So a lot of politics going on around the villa as we speak. But we have two guests with us here this morning, Mr. Ezenwa Wago, who's the Chairman Partners for Electoral Reform, and also Honorable Benjamin Kalu, who's the Chairman House Committee on Media, to discuss some of the issues around the Electoral Act Amendment Bill. And just before we went on break, Mr. Wago, I was speaking to you about the people who are going to operate this Electoral Act Amendment Bill, about how there has been commendation. However, when we look at what we had with the recently concluded election in Anambra, and when we look at the bill, imperfect as it was what came into play, INEC was able to do what it needed to do within that. But when you look at the challenges which were outside the construct of the bill, which were outside the, which were, will I say, beyond the Electoral Act itself, to the environment and to the people who are going to operate it. So, for instance, you had transporters who were afraid for their lives and who, a few times asked for more than they would normally charge to be able to transport materials. When you look at the fact that ad hoc staff who had been trained prior to the elections couldn't carry out the assignments for which they had been trained, because according to INEC, some of them, their parents came to pick them away from that place, and they had to train people on the spot on the same day that the elections were going to be carried out. These are some of the challenges that we face in conducting a successful election. What are your thoughts on some of the things that can be done to mitigate some of the challenges we have encountered, which could also very well be challenges that we'll encounter in forthcoming elections, especially in the general elections?
Well, there are none of these challenges is new. Let's logical challenge that we come to face 2019, even up to the challenges. What needs to happen is a thinking around it. For instance, we can't continue to depend on the road transport workers who have continually reneged on the contract that they entered into with INEC. So what needs to happen is to go above them and find reputable transport organizations that exist in the country who have fleets of vehicles. And then if they, through an open, transparent bid process, if they are not able to make that, can form a consortium of transport companies who can do this assignment. Remember that before we started using ad hoc staff for elections, we had INEC officials who profited and made a bazaar of every elections. We started thinking around it, and then the conduct of election was outsourced to university teachers and corps members. If there are new challenges that is coming with that, it is for us to continue to think about whether we now will have a register of observers, those who have, a register of ad hoc staff, people who have done this work before creditably. We can have a pool from which we can be drawing consistently for those who will want to apply, who have done this work before, who have experience, and who can be used. So the whole challenge that we face, none of them, whether it is in Anambra or anywhere, if you remember in 2013, Idemili North and Idemili South and Uruba, there are new years that we have in Anambra today. So this challenge but the human capacity to solve problems is what we need to pick in when we have challenges. And that is why you need an electoral commission that is forward-looking. And I'm sometimes part of the reason why I'm very restrained to criticizing INEC is because I see an INEC that is always working to overcome these challenges. But what then happens is that we see them still relying on the same people the pains. For the security agencies, for instance, there was no reason why you could have 34,000 policemen, 20,000 NSDC, state security service, and then we still postpone the election in Anambra. The reason why that happens is because our service delivery outcomes have no consequence. If people derelict on their duties, there are no consequences, there are no sanctions, we paper over it and everybody moves on. What we need to do is, after every election, there should be an election audit. That audit should be public so that Amawekwe and Channels TV and all of us who showed a lot of enthusiasm in this election can have an idea of what happened, and a thinking around how to overcome the challenges that we faced can now be put in place. But once we have any election, we paper over the challenges that we have and wait until a new challenge throws up itself, and then we begin to lament. So we can get away from complaining to being solution-minded. How do we solve the problems? I was talking about the political parties, that they also constitute 60% of the candidates that we have in our electoral process. By the indirect primaries now, we're going to create a new level of power for those who will be screening candidates. You see, so we have solved one problem. We are now going to be dealing with another one. A new power block which two parties who will lobby to be in the screening committees, because by then they will have the power of, in quote, life and death over who will run election. So what will happen is more and more conscientization, more and more civic education, more and more engagement with the different stakeholders to be able to expand and expand the conversations way that backs the kind of elections that we're looking forward to having in 2023 and beyond.
Thank you so much, Mr. Wago. Let me quickly come to Honorable Kalu now. I'm sure that you've listened to Mr. Wago, and I'm sure that you're also beginning to picture perhaps some of the challenges that could come up. Yes, it is true that the Electoral Act as currently passed by the National Assembly has a lot of good points. But when we think of, say, for instance, how how will I put it now? The Electoral Act as currently passed was not even the one that was used in the Anambra election. It was the imperfect, there's no perfect law, but it was the one yet to be amended which came to play in the Anambra elections. When you think of what happened within your own party in Anambra State, the internal politics which rocked the APC within Anambra State, and the fact that people said, oh, but direct primaries was what came to play in Anambra. And we saw humongous figures as the number of people who actually elected the candidate for the party. However, that number, they still did not come up for the elections itself. I mean, that number did not show up at the elections. There are huge questions as to whether this direct primaries, which the National Assembly says is the way to go, is truly the way to go.
Maugbe, I must appreciate you for highlighting that what happened in Anambra State was not from the Electoral Act that we are discussing at the moment. Probably they were doing a mock trial there. But having said so, the issue you raised, which others have also raised frequently, has been the issue of the number gotten from the primaries during direct primaries as against the number of votes at the end of the election. And this is my answer to that. When you go through your primaries and you get high number of votes for you to emerge, it does not mean that if you do nothing in sustaining those loyal voters, that they will vote for you in the general election. I use myself as an example. I emerged through direct primaries. And during that direct primaries, it was my party that voted for me. The same thing happened to my opponent, who was voted by his party. But during the elections, his party members voted for me, and other party members voted for me. So he got less from what the number that voted for him during the primaries, and I got more. So what is my point? My point is that if you emerge during direct primaries, that is not the end of the game. You need to sustain your activities, and your manifesto must be clear to the people. If not, a lot of people will abandon you between the primaries and the general election. So it would be wrong for somebody to stand and say, because you got 300,000 during your direct primaries, the general election you got less. The question should be,
I don't know
happened?
if you can hear me. Can you hear me, Honorable Kalu? Oh, good.
Clearly.
Thank you. When people raise when they raised that number, and when they pointed out that particular difference between the number of people who voted, who allegedly, and I think it's important to use that phrase now, or that word, allegedly voted in the primaries, as against the number of people who actually voted in an election where technology was deployed. Do you really think that we can go with the figure that came out of a direct primaries where there was no technology deployed, as against that? Because some people will say that, that again comes down to human operators. We're talking about 200,000 people plus vis-a-vis, say, about 50,000 people who voted for your party in an election. That disparity is quite outstanding. You don't agree?
Like I've said, the disparity will be there on two grounds. Some people, after voting for you during your primaries, may not be there, might develop an apathy between, the time they voted for you and the general election. That is one. Two, they might switch camp with their votes. Yes, we granted that we voted for you during your primaries, but between your primaries and the general election, we've seen this is the direction we want to go. And you've seen most party members voting against their party. So it's not a good ground.
So you do not smell any foul play, if I'm getting you correctly. You do not smell any foul play in the figures. Because for a number of people, they will say those figures look like they would have been manipulated.
Until they are audited, it would be wrong to make an assumption that there was a foul play. Like my colleague there said, there should be an audit after every election. And the same thing goes for the political parties. They should do an audit at the end of the day. And until there is an audit on what actually transpired, it would be wrong to make that assumption that the people who handled it inflated the number of votes for a particular candidate. So I would not accept that my political party did something that was out of the books at this point, until the result of any audit, if carried out. In fact, you've raised a very important issue through this conversation, that an audit is supposed to be done. What really happened? How did we get that number? How come that the number we are getting in the general election, what happened? So we'll be able to figure it out. But my experience, like what I just used to explain previously, people who voted for other candidates switch camp and voted for me during my general election. And it doesn't mean that those who voted for them during their primaries, that it was an inflated figure, because some of them got less than the number that voted for them during their primaries. And because they gave me that vote. Does that make their own primaries to be without credibility? The answer is no. It's just that you need to push your manifesto. You need to do the legwork. You don't sit and wait for magic to happen after your primaries. You don't wait. It's not 34,000 people that will do the election, 34,000 people that came as security that will do the election. You still need to go to house. You still need to convince the people. You still need to sell yourself. If you fail to do that because you have grabbed the ruling party's ticket, you are making a mistake. So people will leave you and go to where they have a stronger message, a stronger conviction, a philosophy that they believe that is workable. So that is what I think. So we'll call for the audit if need be to know what exactly happened. Yeah.
Well, it will be very interesting, Honorable Kalu, to find out what that audit would say if a political party had elections where the total vote cast, one political party, total vote cast was 348,490 in one election, and we find out that in the total election of all the political parties and all of the states and the people who voted in that election, all of it came to what? 253,388? Do you see that audit happening, Honorable Kalu?
If the people call for it, if the political parties call for it, because it's a political party affair, if they call for it, it will happen. Why won't it happen? That is why we are trying to return the power to the people. You see, the beauty of this Electoral Act Amendment Bill that we are talking about, it cannot be overemphasized. It cures some of these issues that all of us are raising today. Returning power, there is nothing as beautiful as returning power to the people in a democratic system. You cannot claim to be practicing democracy when the power still resides in the hands of the party lords and all the rest of them. We must return it to the people. If we return it to the people, people will be asking the right questions. People will be asking for the right explanations. And if they are not there, they will query it at the moment. It is not there. So that is why this Electoral Act Amendment Bill should be supported by everyone to become an act in no distance time. Yeah, I see it happening if people ask for it. But remember, we are still operating in the old Act. The one we are proposing now is the innovation that is found in this new Electoral Act that will advance our democracy forward. And I know you agree with me that it will advance our democracy, despite the challenges. I know you agree with me that it will advance our democracy forward.
Well, Mr. Nwagu, do you agree with
Yes.
Honorable Kalu? Because, I mean, those figures are, I don't know. What do you make of it? Just a quick analysis of that, of this bill that this proposition that we're talking about in the light of the issues just raised.
I think Honorable Kalu is right to an extent. The bigger challenge which we have not asked is most of the people who came to vote in that primaries, do they have voters cards? I have had to train a political party in a state, and when I got to the hall that the training was supposed to hold, it was so unwieldy. So I had to ask them to help me.
Oh, sincerely, I sincerely hope that we'll be able to get a better conversation around this matter, Mr. Nwagu. But the network hasn't done justice to your eloquence this morning. But for now, we have to thank you very much for your partnership in having this conversation with us. Chairman of Partners for Electoral Reform, convener Seno Campaign, and board member Civil Society Situation Room, Ezenwa Nwagu, as well as Honorable Benjamin Kalu, spokesman, House of Representatives, and the Chairman, House Committee on Media. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us for this conversation this morning.
Thank you very much.
Okay. A very quick break to lay a foundation for the next conversation. It's around NSARS. Do stay with us.